Hey friend, if you're looking for a few quick exercises to help you improve your eye for color, composition, and a few other things, then this tutorial is going to be for you. I'm breaking down 3 different fundamental techniques that you need to know as an artist in 3 different exercises or paintings. This is a little snapshot or snippet of my course, The Art Within, which is a super in-depth my signature online course that basically takes you through art school and style school, how to find and develop your style as an artist without the cost of going to art school and without the time investment of going to a 4-year art school. So if you want to check that out, go check that out. We'll link to it in the description, but let me show you a snapshot of that in this video. Okay, so the first of 3 exercises that I love doing just as a quick refresher, or if I'm looking for something to paint but I don't want to go on YouTube and follow along with a tutorial or copy someone else's, then I love starting with these 3 main ideas: floral, landscape, and bubbles or abstract painting. And I'm going to show you a couple of ways for each painting to keep it simple so that you can follow your own ideas. So let's start with a landscape. I've done a few different tutorials on this channel before of my Matisse style landscapes. This is just where you follow color blocking. So you can go online, maybe Pinterest or Google, and find a landscape, a scene, or you can take photos from your own area and just going section by section in the scene or the photograph and just blocking off colors. So if I am looking at a photograph of the Oregon coast, like what this painting is of, then I look for my brown chunk, my green chunk, my sky chunk, my foreground chunk, and I basically do a sketch study of those individual shapes to see what those overall shapes look like if I were to abstract them and keep them as simple as possible. And so without doing the sketching part, because the sketching part is something that you can train and do over and over again, but I don't do it every single time that I'm sitting and doing these loose style landscape paintings. I should be able to finish each one of these paintings in about 10 minutes or less. So I'm using a size 16 or a size 6 round brush. I'm just going to keep the landscape painting here in the center. I'm not going to do the full sheet. I'm just going to keep it kind of small. You can tape off area that you want to paint on, or you can do the whole sheet if you want to. But again, if you're trying to do the time restriction for your piece to help you practice moving quickly and making quicker decisions and taking big risks, then I would keep it small, because the bigger it is, the more time consuming it is. So the first thing to do for practicing any type of painting like this is to think about color. So if I'm wanting to stretch and help myself get better with my imagination and also color combinations, then I might look at a photograph or a live scene and take what I see but interpret it differently in terms of color. So if I'm looking at a beach scene, for example, we're going to see sand, we're going to see some ocean, some blues for our ocean, some blues or, sunset colors for our sky. But how can we abstract that and make it different so that it's unique in our own? So maybe I take the sand color and I add, and I can go in one of a few different directions. I can go pastel, I can go pop or really vibrant and juicy colors, or I can go muted and earthy tones. There's a few different directions that you can go with your color palette. So what would happen if I went pastel? So the best way I like to do pastel is just by adding white to my watercolors. So you can use white gouache or you can use white acrylic paint. I'm just using white acrylic paint because it's what I have closest to me. And I'm going to mix up a sand color, and I'm just gonna paint a beach scene that's just in my imagination. We're going to keep it simple. But this is how I would approach it by making it a more fun piece or making it more my own, is through color. So I'm taking my white paint and I'm adding primary yellow and yellow ochre to it to create my sand color. And now that I have a fun, creamy, pastel-y sand color, I'm going to test out my color palette on paper. So I could go from this color, I could go in a bunch of different directions. I do want to have some contrast for maybe some little rocks and bits that I might add to a cliff scene. And a fun color palette that I love working with is this pastel beige and dragon's blood. So I'm grabbing a thick, creamy dragon's blood. And already that's probably a surprising direction to take it with this piece. We're going from a pastel to a really deep, intense reddish brown. And then I'm gonna help bring it back down to that softness with a soft blue. So I'm gonna do my white acrylic paint, just a dot of it, and some fancy blue or phthalo turquoise or even Prussian blue, but just a touch of it. And maybe a little touch of black to make it a more of a smoky light blue. Or you can keep it without the black if you prefer, up to you. So I've got this baby blue with a touch of smoke to it, which is a very, very beautiful color next to this deep red. And we're tying in the lightness with this pastel sand color, this lighter white and yellow ochre color. So we're keeping those cohesive, and this is like our anchoring color. This is just gonna be used in details. It's not gonna be used a ton. Now I want to bring in some green. So I'm gonna tie in the yellow from this sand color and keep it in the yellow green variety. I love green gold from my Mary Blue. It's one of my favorite colors. It's kind of like a chartreusey, more of a earthy tone chartreuse. And that color palette is already stunning. But I want to round it out with a deep indigo blue, almost black. And then we can just keep it to 5 colors or less. Because again, we're just doing a quick exercise. This isn't something that we're getting too detailed with at all. It's very loose. So I've got a thick amount of Prussian blue, really creamy, thick amount of Prussian blue, and then a touch of black, or if you have indigo straight from the tube, that's probably good enough by itself. But I want it to be deep and dark to help pull in the depth of Dragon's Blood so that it's not by itself out there in the deep end, but also pull in more of this blue to tie in the blues and greens. So we've got this dark blue, Prussian blue, and black. So that's our color palette. I'm gonna rinse my brush off and just paint a really simple scene. So I'm gonna start with sand, ocean, maybe a cliff off on the side, some trees, sky, and then details with my dark blue on the ocean, details with my dark reddish brown on the sand for some rocks. So I'll start with my sand color, which is that pastel-y beige, creamy beige. And I'm using the side of my brush to give me these long sweeping strokes. I don't want anything to look like I thought about it too much. So I want to use my brush as an extension of my arm. I don't want it to be something that I'm fiddling and swirling around and tightly pushing around with my fingers. I want it to be an extension of my arm. So I'm not moving it with my fingers, I'm moving it with my arm. And I'm using a really low slanted hold, and I'm just going to sweep in a somewhat flat section. And I'm gonna drag it down with some water at this point to fade it down into an even lighter beige. So maybe there's this little hillside that we're looking up at, or something like that. And we're just gonna keep bringing that down. I'm just moving my arms side to side. It doesn't need to be a perfect in the lines shape, but I'm just cleaning up my strokes because that's what's gonna make all the difference in making this piece feel like an ocean scene and feel fun and unique and feel like it's complete. So I'm gonna leave it down like that. And then we'll slide in our blue right here on the top. And I'm gonna even this line out so that it looks like a flat horizon. So I'm gonna do that straight across for that blue. And then same thing, but leaving for the ocean, leaving gaps of white space for the reflection, for the dappled light on the water, for little breaks and waves. I might go in here on top of the sand here and make this more water overlapping the sand so it's less hilly, which you can do, or you can leave it. So we can cover stuff up if we want to, let it blend like so. And then I'm gonna have maybe a hillside coming in this view here. Or actually, we're gonna put something off in the distance. Just something small. Again, you're using your imagination because it's challenging you to come up with your own ideas. So just try it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's all experience. So maybe here's a little peak of a cliffside coming in from over here too. We'll just leave it rough on the side as like a, hey, there's something else over there, but we're not going to tell you what it is. You have to use your imagination. And maybe some more cliffs coming in here. So I'm sweeping in these little beige bits here and there, like that. And then we'll leave it like that. Grab our green. So I'm building light to dark. So I've started with my beige. I got slightly darker with my light blue. Now I'm gonna get a little bit deeper and more intense with my green gold. And I'm gonna add this green gold to my hillside. And this is still wet, so we're gonna have some wet and wet, but I'm using a really thick, creamy color so that it doesn't spread too much. And I'm just twisting my brush around to get different shapes for each little plop. I oftentimes see in art critiques in my Patreon or people's work that they tag me in or whatever, people will do the same plop with the brush in the same direction, the same size, the same amount of pressure, etc. And it's obvious, you can see their brush strokes. So rotate your brush around, make it more organic. Use the tip of the brush sometimes, not just the side of the brush. Make it point up sometimes or make it point down. Just change it up so that it doesn't look so uniform. And I can use water too to soften some of these edges or bring it down more. So if I start to see any sort of uniform look to my splotches, I'll even go in and go back over it until I like the way it looks. So we've got some of that green popping in. I'll do a lighter version of that green gold by adding water to it and popping it in on the sky in the distance. It's kind of more yellow than I want it to be, so I'm actually going to add some sap green to it and soften that. Can put some greens down in here for maybe little trees, happy little trees, or whatever. Okay, so now let's start popping in our dragon's blood. Again, thick, creamy color. And I'm gonna start with carving out some detail on the little cliffs or hills or mounds, whatever you wanna call them. And just kind of blur my eyes so that I'm not focusing too much on where I'm placing all of this. It's not gonna make sense where it's placed. We're just adding some contrast and creating some sort of movement with our shapes. So I can, with my detail colors, my darker colors, start to add in more concrete shapes. Like here's our little pebbles or rocks or something. And then over here I've got these dashes, which could be trunks of trees, it could be branches, it could be whatever it is. But these little dashes are helping to create texture which is a really helpful element to have when you're painting abstract. You want to think about how you can amplify the style and make the piece more unique through bits like texture or shape and line weight and all of that. Now we're going to use the blue, and the blue isn't just going to go on our water. We're going to use it as a little contrast color for our greens as well, but just have it more in the waves and less in the greens. So we're just gonna outline a few of these little bits. You can add this color however you want to. I'm deciding to paint in more concrete wave shapes with it. You can keep it more simple than that if you want. And then I'm gonna go in and just sprinkle her in here and there, not too much. There's no right or wrong place to put all these. It's more so about the color palette interacting and painting shapes. I'm going to put in a sky with the same light blue color. So I'm going straight across. And then I'm just going to drag it down with water. And then some darker color in between some of the lighter color. So it kind of looks like, you could also do like a light pastel pink for your sky, which would be really pretty with this palette. And you don't have to go all the way to your next section. And there you have it. You can put trees in the foreground, but keep it simple. It doesn't have to look like your favorite painting ever, but it's gonna help you explore color. It's gonna help you explore shape and just thinking differently about landscapes. And the next piece that we're gonna practice that's gonna help you practice brush technique. So this one is helpful for practicing, you know, taking risks, trying new color palette ideas, and also abstracting and simplifying something into really simple shapes. All right, so this next painting is gonna be florals, and we're gonna use the Blooms brush actually, not our round brush. This is the prototype of the Blooms brush, so the handle looks different, and it's, you know, not the Velvet Touch series handle because it was the prototype when I was like helping them design it and looking through different prototypes. They sent me a bunch. So anyway, this is the Blooms brush, even though it doesn't look like it. We are gonna use 2 colors, well actually 3. Dragon's blood mixed with black for these really deep, dark, rich, creamy tulips, and green gold. And we're gonna paint tulips, closed bud tulips, from top down view. So we're gonna be looking down on a centerpiece or a vase or whatever of tulips. And we're just gonna focus on using the shape of this brush and not trying to overcomplicate and make the shape something that it isn't, or make it fancier than it needs to be. We're just gonna simplify it and keep it just basically using the shape of the brush and letting that shine. So I have a 25-ish degree hold on my brush and a thick, creamy amount of dragon's blood and carbon black. And I'm just gonna, with medium pressure, bring my arm down in this slight C-curve motion. So a C-curve that's curving on the left side, and then I'm gonna go and start at the same spot and do the same thing, but curve in on the right. So I'm curving in towards the same stroke. And then I might go in and make this petal a little bit longer and just clean up those edges a little bit. Booyah, there you have 1 tulip. And then I take the top edge of the brush and carve in a little base where all of these petals are pointing down into. Before going on to any sort of leaves, I do want to make sure to paint quickly because we are going to have fun painting wet and wet. But I'm going to do a couple more of those thick, creamy dragon's blood buds. Maybe this one is pointing up at us and we just see the top of it. So maybe I paint in a little circle and then there's maybe like a little petal opening like that. So keep your shapes really simple and just use the brush itself as the shape of the petal. So again, I'm gonna do more of a bud like this. We've got petal here, go on the other side, curve in slightly, but it's not a huge curve. And then you carve out the point at the base. And then we'll come down over here and have maybe a shorter bud with a petal coming off there. The main thing with these tulips though is they are quite like long oval shapes. So you will want to show that length. And let's do one more to keep it not even numbers. We'll do something maybe down in here, pointing this way. Like so. Then we'll grab our green gold in a milky, creamy consistency. And before painting in any stems, I'm gonna paint in some leaves. So if we're looking down, tulip leaves are like the thick, stable strips, kind of. So you might see a leaf that's maybe cut off or bending down and we can't see the top of it. So we're just gonna do like this strip. And I love when the colors, we're gonna add a little bit of sap green to that green gold because it's a little too yellow. I love when these two colors bleed together. The dark and the bright, vibrant chartreusey green is magical. I'm going to paint a leaf over here that maybe has a little bit more of a tip, but we're pointing back to the center where this vase might be and we're looking straight down. So we're coming back to this point, this center point, but I don't want to overlap and come in here too much. So keep it just shapes, no stems, just shapes, no stems for now. And show shapes that have a tip. Some shapes are more of those strip shape because they might have the tip bending like that and you can't see it. Drop in some sap green here and there if you need to. Some lighter values, some darker values, some leaves that, you know, crisscross. Make sure and overlap each other. And just using the brush to really sweep in with these bigger strippy, I don't know if that's a word, strippy shapes. Have a leaf up here with the point. So for the point, I'm just using the corner of the brush, so tilt the brush on its side. Don't have it flat. So the corner of the brush, and I'm bringing it down a few times for these. And then maybe we'll add in this big green section in the center. Kind of make it like this meeting spot for all these leaves and things. Might have this kind of come down here for a little tip on this leaf. Like that. And now we'll give it some stems and call it a day. But see how, because we worked quickly, the dragon's blood, the black tulip, chocolatey tulip is bleeding into the leaves, and that is the moment that we're going for. That's what we want to practice. We want to practice a simple shape that we can see these fun, beautiful results that make us want to keep practicing it over and over again without having to try too hard. So we've got, you know, these like circular oval shapes that are our tulips. But we don't need to fuss and make it this really complicated painting. And you can add more flowers to this. You can add leaves on top of here to cover up some of that intersecting of these stems. But that is just the simple, quick 5 to 10 minute exercise for getting that, like, first of all, a completely different perspective than what you would normally paint. Most people paint flowers either looking at the vase from the side or maybe at a slight angle, but not top down like this. So this is just a different perspective to switch it up and to challenge yourself, but then also keep it to 2 colors and keep the shapes really simple. So we're just doing those long strokes with the belly of the brush for these long, but kind of curve it. Don't curve it too much. You look at a picture of tulips and you'll see what I mean. You want to keep it somewhat simplified, maybe 2 curves, 2 little humps, but not much more than that. Some of them have tips, some of them don't, because they might be, you know, folded over. And then these are just the simple little parentheses, but they're hugging and really close together. And some of them have these little petals that are pulled off. So that is our second exercise. The first exercise is exploring more, you know, challenging yourself in the color department and the shapes department. This is more challenging you in the perspective department and also wet and wet technique. The next one is also going to expand on wet and wet technique and brush technique, but also composition. So I explore the principles of composition and color theory and all those things in perspective, etc. inside my Art Within course. So if you want more deep dive lessons on that you would find in art school and similar, then go check out the Art Within. But this exercise is a really great exercise in helping you expand your thinking in terms of composition for something that covers a whole sheet of paper, not a landscape scene or anything like that. And we're just gonna do a simple bubble painting. I've done this many, many times here on my channel before. Bubbles are something that's painted by many different artists throughout history, or circles, whatever you wanna call them. But it's just such a good exercise to practice with watercolor, and it can be really mesmerizing and get you into flow state. So I'm just gonna use a round brush. I'm gonna use a size 6 round brush. If you wanna paint bigger bubbles, circles, whatever, then use a size 16 for bigger. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna think about color and also composition, because this is gonna help teach us how to compose our pieces, not just for bubble paintings, but also for florals and for anything else that we're painting. So what I want you to do before we start painting is to imagine 2 lines, vertical and horizontally, going down the center of your paper. This is a 9x12 sheet of paper from St. Cuthbert's Mill, their Saunders Waterford paper, and I'm painting it vertically. So we have a line and a line, imaginary line, going down the center of both horizontal and vertical. And that gives us 4 individual sections or paintings. I'm right-handed, so I like to start in the top left-hand corner and work my way down in this zigzag motion. Most of the time I see people, when they're just getting started with paintings like this, they like to paint a circle and then hop all the way down here and paint their next circle. But the idea is to use wet and wet technique, and also it's best for keeping things in flow if you follow consecutive circles. This doesn't mean that you can't ever go back and jump around, but once I get about 75% of the way through my sheet of paper, I can kind of see where it's feeling off balance, and then I'll jump back. But to do it where you just paint one circle and then you hop around is gonna leave you with a lot of dry circles that won't give you those blooms that we're trying to achieve with wet and wet, and it's also gonna be really hard to not create some sort of tipping point because you don't know how it's building and flowing in one quadrant. So let's build out I'm gonna do a more like modern pop vibe with the color palette, so something bright. So I'm gonna have some oranges, some bright pinks, But then I'm also going to bring it down to earth a little bit with this dragon's blood color that we're weaving into all of these paintings. So I'm going to just practice the color palette on a scrap sheet of paper. So I know I want to use some orange, but I need to be careful with my orange because it's such an intense color. So if I use something, a lot of blues or something like that, I just need to be careful with how I incorporate them. So I'm just gonna test it out. We have this warm brown with the dragon's blood. It has a lot of reddish orange in it. So that's gonna be a good analogous color to use next to the orange. It's not as modern or vibrant as the primary orange or the permanent orange. So it's kind of bringing in some earthy tone to it. I just want to see what happens if we go really wild. Let's add in some turquoise. I don't love that yet, but let's just keep going and see. I love cupric green, some of my vibrant color. And because phthalo turquoise and cupric green have that similar base, that like turquoise blue, those work together, but it's still feeling way too loud. So we want to calm this down a little bit. So I'm going to bring in some pastel colors. I'm going to do a pastel yellow. There's a lot of yellow happening because we have these blue greens, which has yellow in them, and then yellow with the orange. So I'm going to tie in that yellow but soften it a lot by adding white paint to my yellow. But I'm using primary yellow and a touch of green gold as my main color. So it's going to be like a pastel lime green. A little bit darker. Pretty, pretty. And now I want to tie in this orange a bit more with a pink. Really vibrant pink. Like Cheryl. And maybe a black, because we're getting deep and bringing that down. So you can get real wild and crazy with your color palettes. But this helps to incorporate some more earthy tones with the black and the brown. I still want to see less intensity between the orange and the blue, so I want to bridge that gap a little bit more with a little bit of a yellow orange. So we'll use this base with an orange to cream it up. So a bit nicer. Like that. Maybe we'll use it, but probably not. Maybe we'll use it, but less frequent. Less frequent too, but I still want to use it. But that'll be our main color palette. Okay. So we're just painting bubbles. And like I said, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start in the top left-hand corner, and we're just painting bubbles. We want to make sure that each one of our bubbles is different in, okay, that's a good start. Splatter. It's okay, it's going to be overlapped. But we just want to make sure that we're varying the size, the hue, and the shape of our bubbles so they're not all the same, or we're not clustering together the same colors or same size, that we're mixing it up. And we want to make sure that we're using the tip of our brush for the outline to give it that smooth swirl on the outer edge so that it has a clean, not shaky outline. But you also want to make sure that you're filling it in rather quickly with the side of your brush so that it stays really wet. You know if it's still wet if it glistens in light. So hold it up to some light. If it's glistening and shiny, then you know it's still wet and you can move to the next circle. Now I'm gonna move on to that creamy lime green color because we're just shifting the yellow and the orange to a yellow green. So it's just a subtle shift in color. It's not so startling yet. I'm gonna fill it in. And because these colors they have acrylic paint in them, they aren't gonna bloom as intensely as the pure watercolors will, but you'll still get some of that bloom happening. And I'm just gonna help assist that little bloom, grab more orange and kind of push it into the yellow. But we wanna keep moving. So we've got that yellow green. Now I can lead into Kubrick green for a vibrant, intense color because we have that subtle transition to it, but it's an intense color. And I'm just gonna make this a little bit smaller. I'm starting with the outline for that swirl of my brush. And then I'll use water and the side of my brush to fill it in. Love how that bloom is coming out. And then instead of moving to a different color, maybe we just move to a different value and just use water for this next circle. Outline it first, fill it in, and then slightly, just barely kiss and touch the neighboring circles. I also want to touch the yellow, and we'll just let that kind of soft neutral color be a nice way to create movement throughout the piece, so it's not all these fun colors that we have to look at. We've got some breaks for our eyes. Next, I'm gonna mix phthalo turquoise with a little bit of the Kubrick green so that it's not a big jump to the phthalo turquoise just yet, just a little bit more subtle. Maybe more milky consistency. Let's do a little more blue. And let it bloom. Next, I'm gonna do my creamy black. And we'll bring it down over here. Don't be afraid to use colors that you normally wouldn't. Just see what happens. So they might end up being your favorite bits of contrast. But now that we're using black, we need to make sure that we're sprinkling this in a zigzag throughout this piece. So I'm almost full with my first quadrant. So now's the time to start looking at the overall shape. The positive space and negative space are equally important. So we have this triangle shape happening. So I'm gonna come up here, probably bringing that black up so we can create a zigzag as we go down. Over here. With that. And then we'll do some more of that creamy orange. Maybe a little lighter this time and smaller. More like a beige, just a hint of the orange. And then pink would be good. Let it blend. Make sure it stays wet, especially on that outer edge where you're gonna put your next circles, otherwise they won't bloom and do these little explosions. We'll do a deeper orange over here. And I love overlapping using wet and dry technique. When there's a circle beneath that's dry already, then you can overlap and see those two shapes on top of each other. Now let's bring in that yellow, pastel lime yellow green. We don't want to create lines, so I'm not going to put the yellow right here because that's going to start to create a line. We want to offset it a little bit. Maybe we've got just this tiny guy over here starting to bounce like that. Maybe we're going over here into this top right quadrant with Power color, we'll put this here. Starting to zig and zag. And then some Kubrick. So you're just hopping along, just changing up your colors, looking back at each quadrant to see where the colors you're about to use have been used before, so that you can create zigzag lines instead of straight lines with your colors. Let's bring this Kubrick green up here. This is when I would jump around because I can see where we're starting to go with it. But I can't see that unless I do about 60 to 75% of the first quadrant first. Now let's go into some black. So we can boop, boop. And it doesn't have to be perfect zigzags for each color and each shape. You just want to try and create that movement overall so that people aren't going and finding patterns like lines of where all your colors are lining up or where all of your shapes, similar shapes are lining up, etc. So maybe put a tiny guy up there and do a more taupey taupe down in here, and some pink. Pink and green are very contrasting colors. When done appropriately, they help create vibrancy. But when done inappropriately, they can cause strain. So just try and keep one more subtle than the other. So the pink is more subtle because it's smaller in shape. But I love this burst. And now some orange down in here. Some brighter pink like this one, because these are more medium pinks. Maybe add some orange to the pink. Down over here. Paint the circle first and then make it bigger to touch the neighboring circles. They're not all gonna bloom, but you do want a lot of them to do that. Maybe we'll just do a watery. Let's do black, but lighter. Black shell, more Kubrick. Doot, 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 boop, boop. Some more contrast, but this time green is smaller. Now some phthalo turquoise. Let's go squeeze this in here. Got this, so I'm going to put a small turquoise up here. Doot, doot, doot. Similar to Kubrick green, so I'm going to change up the value and size of this turquoise that's going to be right next to it. So I'm painting it with a little bit more water, and it's going to be slightly bigger. Make sure we're still incorporating especially those really vibrant colors like the yellows and greens throughout the piece so they don't just get forgotten as you work your way down. Love this moment. And what's gonna look awesome here is a grayish black, maybe a little white in the black. Touch, touch. Maybe do more of that color up here too. We need that dark black to weave back in. So it's not just top heavy. And fun big turquoise right here with mostly water. And swirl to touch the black. Let it burst. Sprinkle in some more of that creamy orange. And some pink. That's a nice bleed. Just take that pink down over here too, but lighter. Yellow, creamy yellow. Creamy orange. Got some nice balance of color. Needs a couple Kubricks. And turquoise. Don't be afraid to put the same two colors next to each other. Just make sure that the values and shapes are different. But you do want most of your shapes to be slightly different from each other if they're neighboring so that you can see those obvious bursts. If the colors are too similar, you won't see them as well. Blackish gray in here, maybe a little bigger. And here, fill in that little gap. Give this corner more of a point instead of this curve coming in. And a little black down in here to help even out this line. And help anchor all that darkness that's happening with this turquoise and black down here with a really dark Kubrick green kind of in between to break that up. And there you go. So we were able to do that in about 10 minutes or less. And that is the flow. When you're thinking about composition, doing something that has something scattered all over it, like flowers or bubbles like this, is working consecutively for the most part, but then trying to think about creating that zigzag or balance with your colors, with your shapes, and with your values. So those three things are the most important pieces to think about when trying to create that nice movement and balance of movement with your shape, with your size, value, and your color. So the lightness and darkness is the value, and then also your color to create that balance. I also really like this color range here too, these lighter colors with the brighter pinks. I think that could be a really fun color palette too, something that's not so all over the place. But if you're wanting a piece that's really bright and wild and out there and kind of 70s-ish feel, then having these high and low levels of contrast is going to help you create that loudness. So have fun with it. I hope all those three exercises helped you expand certain techniques in different ways. There you go, friend. I hope those three exercises are really helpful in bringing clarity around what you can do when you sit at your painting desk and you're like, I have no idea what to paint. You can always come back to this video, so maybe save it, bookmark it, send it to yourself, copy and paste the link, whatever. Share it with your friends. I'm sure there's so many other artists out there who would love to have these helpful exercises. And make sure you check out my Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor ebook. It's totally free. All I need is your email address so I can send it to you. And then you can unsubscribe from my email list. I don't care. But it's a 40-page free ebook that's going to teach you all of the ins and outs of technique, color theory, composition, supplies to use, etc. for watercolor. So make sure you check that out. And also check out my online course, The Art Within, which I've mentioned a few times in this video because it's just such an awesome course. We've had thousands of students join the course and get so many good results. I've even had tons of messages from people who have gone to actual traditional art school and told me they learned way more in this course than they ever did in art school. So make sure you check it out, and I'll see you in the next video.